Good evening, hello and welcome. You're with the news today, your primetime destination news. Newspapers talking points. The big talking point tonight is coming from the United Kingdom, where there's been a massive, historic Labour Party landslide that's buried Rishi Sunak and the Tories. What does this UK verdict in this big election year across the world mean for India and the world? That's the question that we're going to pose tonight. But let's turn to tonight's big story, and it comes today from the United Kingdom that has voted for change, and how? In a landslide victory. The new Prime Minister of Britain will be Sir Keir Starmer. He's been appointed a short while ago by King Charles to lead the country after the Labour scored a dramatic victory with one of its highest ever mandates. Ousted Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has suffered a big defeat, even though he won his own constituency. In his resignation speech, Sunak accepted that he had heard the anger of the people after the Tories were routed out of office. In fact, Britain showed that you can cross 400 seats. The Labour Party has done it by becoming 400 par 14 years after being ousted from power. Take a look.
The 4th of July night, as the counting began, stretching to 5th July morning, it turned out to be an astonishing result. Beyond the stupendous scale of Labour's overall victory, it was a night of shock results, big swings and unexpected upsets. The incumbent UK Prime Minister won from the Richmond constituency but lost his job at 10 Downing Street.
To the country, I would like to say first and foremost, I am sorry. I have given this job my all.
Sir Keir Starmer moves on from being the leader of opposition to the top job in the House of Commons with a stunning victory of scoring 400 plus seats.
We've changed the Labour Party, returned it to service, and that is how we will govern. Country first, party second.
The man whom Starmer replaced in 2020 as the leader of Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, won convincingly, fighting as an independent as his former party barred him. The leader of the Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, after an action-packed campaign where he fell into a lake, careered down a water slide and did a bungee jump in antics, retained his outer London constituency of Kingston and Surbiton. His party has achieved its best ever result at 70 plus seats.
Tonight, the Liberal Democrats are on for our best result for over a century. And I'm really proud that our party has fought so positively during this campaign, particularly putting the reforming and fixing the crisis in our health and care system right at the forefront. And the many Liberal Democrat MPs who are being elected tonight are going to continue to fight to sort out health and care so the people of our great country can get the health and care they deserve.
Conservatives had the worst night. Not only were their numbers reduced, big shots like the former Prime Minister Liz Truss, Defence Minister Grant Shapps have lost. Scottish National Party has been reduced to single digit from its previous tally of 46 in 2019.
Yeah, I feel better today than I did yesterday, I think. I feel pretty tired. I was up all night watching it. So, yeah, excited for something new to happen, I think. I think the country needs it. It's not the same, you know, I was a child in '97. I don't think it's quite that kind of spirit. But I'm hopeful that the new government will come in with some plans. I think if they move quickly, then we can we might be able to find some hope, even though it doesn't feel like they've managed to find it in the campaign so much.
I think the future will be better. I think the future will be more better now. So since the Labour Party is in power now, I think the country will be more better in terms of job, in terms of safety. So there will be more protection in the country and more job for the country.
British newspapers have hailed the Labour landslide, but Sir Keir Starmer, as the new Prime Minister, has a tough task to deliver to satisfy the anti-establishment vote that has catapulted his party to power.
And joining us now is our International Affairs editor, Geeta Mohan. She's there in London. Geeta, it's been quite a day. Landslide, historic victory for the Labour Party. Rishi Sunak is out, and as is always the case in Britain, they've all left their official residences, unlike it happens in India where they overstay. But I just want to ask you, Geeta, Sunak, was this completely expected, the scale of the defeat?
Well, completely expected in terms of defeat, yes. The numbers were staggering when it comes to poll analysis and opinion polls. Some of them were saying that that the Conservatives, that the Labour will get about 480 seats. That would have been historic. It would have broken Tony Blair's record, Rajdeep. But that did not happen. However, and above 400 was something that was predicted. I went around speaking to people. Even Conservatives had this gloomy, there was this entire atmosphere of gloom. They knew that they were losing. They knew they were losing badly. But when the opinion polls started coming in and they said 480, that's the time when most of them had almost given up. So expected, but the numbers are staggering. It's an absolute defeat for the Tories, and for the Labour, it's an opportunity to do things, legislate the way they want to, bring about the change that they want to, because they have the numbers, Rajdeep.
Where does this leave Rishi Sunak? Where does he go from here? He's a very wealthy man. Does he remain the face of the opposition? Jeremy Hunt has also won. So who will be the face now of the Conservatives? Will Rishi Sunak continue in that post, or is he virtually now, is that the end of the road?
Well, he has won his seat, so he still remains a member of parliament, but he certainly will not be the leader of the opposition. Now, the Conservatives will have to again come together to decide who the next leader of the opposition is going to be. It certainly is not going to be Rishi Sunak because he led the party to such a defeat. Many of the Conservatives over here complaining they did not even know that he was going to call for snap polls, and many of them very upset, saying that blaming him for the kind of defeat and for them having lost their own seats. So he certainly is not going to be. We'll have to wait and see who really becomes the leader of the opposition over here. Conservatives, Rajdeep, this time around, it's a very different party altogether. A lot of infighting, everybody over here now staking claim. So again, we'll have to wait for a while before we actually hear of a name who's going to lead the Conservative Party in Parliament.
One final question, Geeta. An interesting element, trivia. At least 10 British Sikhs I saw at the last count have been elected. So pretty impressive Sikh contingent in the House of Commons.
Well, there are quite a few, not just Sikhs, but also from the Indian community itself. The diaspora has come out in full strength from the Conservative and the Labour. There are some interesting snippets, Rajdeep, and it will be interesting to see whether they're going to be part of the government or not. Now, we do know that the Labour has had MPs and leaders who have raised issues regarding India, raised concerns regarding India, whether it's Khalistan, Kashmir, or human rights issues. We'll have to wait and see whether if they'll be allowed to do that, because the party chief, as also Keir Starmer and David Lammy, all three of them have very clearly spelled out that no anti-India sentiment would be allowed this time around. So it is a different party. They will allow a lot of Indian diaspora representation, but will they allow anti-India statements and anti-India elements is something that we'll again have to wait and see. The manifesto was very clear, Rajdeep. It said enhancing strategic cooperation with India. It made India as a very important focal point when it comes to their foreign policy. So I don't think they're going to ruffle feathers with New Delhi at this point in time, at this juncture, when there are too many wars and the situation around the world volatile.
Okay, let's leave it there, Geeta Mohan. Good to have you there joining us from London, giving us a perspective over what's been a dramatic day in British politics. Thanks so much. So let's raise the big questions on that landslide Labour victory in the United Kingdom. What does this UK verdict really mean for the world in this big election year across the world? Is there anger, growing anger against the sitting governments across the globe? Remember, most sitting governments have either suffered a dip in popularity or lost elections in the last few months. Are economic hardships shaping world politics now? Liberals versus right-wing, is that the nature of this battle, and what's next? Joining me now, Farooq Dondi, author and columnist, joins me from London. Navteej Sarna, former envoy to the United Kingdom, is with us. Sandeep Shastri, political scientist, tracks politics across India and the world. And Daniel Block, senior editor, Foreign Affairs magazine in New York. America goes to the polls in a few months from now. Let's come to you, Farooq Dondi, because you're our man in London at the moment. Are you surprised at the scale of the victory? 410 seats and counting. That kind of 400 par. We thought it will happen in India. It's happened in the UK. How do you explain the scale of Labour's victory?
It's not that Labour won the election. They did by over 172 votes, majority. It's that the Conservatives lost by doing all manner of things over the last 14 years. The first disaster they had was the populist Boris Johnson, who was caught lying on several fronts, including breaking the rules that he made himself during COVID. And when he lied to Parliament about it and was forced to resign, it gave a rise to a break in the Conservative Party. Even Rishi Sunak resigned and turned against Boris Johnson, and that began the demise of the Tory party. Secondly, they elected a person called Liz Truss, who's lost her seat yesterday or today, and she had the most awful, nonsensical plan for the growth of Britain by cutting taxes, increasing borrowing, and so on. And markets went wild. The cost of living went up. The share prices fell, and so she had to resign after 49 days. The most disastrous Tory, or the most disastrous period ever in British history. And then, of course, they got Rishi Sunak, who didn't do what the right wing wanted, and the right wing fell away, and he couldn't control immigration. He had a mad scheme about sending illegal immigrants to Rwanda, and his two secretaries, Priti Patel and Suella Braverman, and it's strange that all of them are Indians via Africa as immigrants and citizens of Britain. They all talked about this Rwanda plan, and it was branded as racist. And then somebody who was even more anti-immigrant, like the Reform Party and Nigel Farage, turned up, and they attacked the immigration plan and the NHS plans, which had gone wrong. So it was really a protest vote against the Tories.
So you're saying it's a protest vote against the Tories rather than so much an affirmation against of Labour. Remember, Labour's only got really 35% vote share. They've got a disproportionate number of seats. But Navteej Sarna, you heard Farooq Dondi. Give us a sense of a history of the last 10 years where the Tories have moved from one disaster to another. In a sense, is it the economy stupid, the failure to handle the economy in tough times across the world, given what's happened in Ukraine? We've COVID before that. This has been a tough period of 5 years, so incumbent governments are finding it difficult. Even Narendra Modi, who was expected to get 300 plus, eventually ended up at 240. At least he can claim he didn't lose.
Yes, thank you, Rajdeep. I agree with what Farooq has said. Only I would take it back a little further, because even under David Cameron, we saw, this completely whimsical idea of doing a Brexit referendum, which suddenly became a major issue and actually resulted in Brexit. And that itself divided not just Britain, but entirely the Conservative Party there. We saw a lot of backstabbing and skullduggery happening during that those Brexit days amongst the top echelons of the Conservative Party. And all that led to a lack of trust and a breakdown of what the Conservative was doing. Along with that was a breakdown of the entire system in the UK in terms of public services. People having to wait 2 years for a medical appointment at the NHS, people finding it a problem to travel on British Rail, a complete disaster in terms of public services, a very, very sluggish economy. Despite having broken off from Brexit and expecting this great rise in global Britain, Europe was growing at 4%, Britain is growing at 2%. So it was the economy, it was the scandals, it was the infighting amongst the Tories, and it all that combined to make this, an anti-incumbency feeling to beat all anti-incumbency feelings. And that's the result. You're right, the Labour share has only gone up about 2% in terms of vote share. But in terms of seats, it's the worst defeat the Tories have suffered for more than 100 years. So that's the history.
Both of you are referring to anti-incumbency, the mishandling of the economy. This is, of course, the Tories have been in power for 14 years. So, Sandeep Shastri, just bringing it back home and trying to extrapolate from what's happened there, because we had an election exactly a month ago. The general impression was that Prime Minister Modi would be even further strengthened. Instead, he's been diminished, got 240, but still won in terms of the fact the NDA has a majority. So he could well claim, unlike other parts of the world, and we're seeing what's happening in France. We saw the South African government also diminish a few weeks ago. Do you believe that Mr. Modi could turn around and say, look, in an age of anti-incumbency across the world, I've at least survived and lived to tell the tale?
You're right, Rajdeep, and the point you began with, that 400 plus came 1 month later and in a different country. And that is something that the UK election is about. And clearly, Mr. Modi would make the point that the BJP may have had reduced numbers, but the NDA was voted to power. And this has been the burden of the song that the NDA and its members have sung in the Lok Sabha, in the Thanksgiving address to the President. Rajdeep, if I could make 2 more points, I think I unequivocally support the points made till now, that the UK result is very clearly an anti-Tory vote and not necessarily a pro-Labour vote, especially if you look at the performance of the Liberal Democrats. Given the fact that in 14 years they had 5 prime ministers and the frequent change and the controversies associated with them, let's also remember that never in a UK election have 12 sitting ministers lost the election. I'm told the largest number in the past has been 4 ministers. And again, in the last 100 years, I'm told former Prime Minister has never lost the election. And this has happened in the UK this time. And I think the 3 issues which have been highlighted, which are relevant in the Indian context also, the economic crisis which is being faced by the UK, be it rising inflation, be it spiraling unemployment, I would believe that these are the 2 factors which resulted in the drop of the BJP from 306 to 204. So the economic crisis which actually did in the Tories in the UK was a factor in India too. The scandals which the Tories faced, be it on COVID-19, be it corruption, be it probity in office, I think were also relevant. And finally, the delivery of services, which was also referred to, where the system in the UK seems to have noticed a decline. And many would argue that in India also, in some of the states, the verdict that you saw in the Lok Sabha election was a reflection on the delivery of services. So I would draw a lot of parallels, and I would believe that some of the parallels do not match for India because the crisis was not so acute in that particular domain in the Indian context.
Particularly the economy in India, which has recovered far more sharply post-COVID than it did in the United Kingdom. But Daniel Block, you're joining us from New York. In November, we'll have the big presidential elections. Do you get any takeaways from what has happened in Britain? You've got an economy which is on the up, and despite that, the numbers are showing Biden trailing Trump. Is this a reflection of the debate that's going on over Biden's age? There's talk that he might even step down after that first debate and give way possibly to Kamala Harris or another candidate. But are there takeaways that sitting governments are on notice at the moment across the world, or is the US very different compared to what happened in the United Kingdom?
There are obviously a lot of differences between what's happening in the United Kingdom and what's happening in the United States. As you noted, our economy is quite a bit stronger than it is in the UK. At the same time, one thing that's quite consistent is inflation. Inflation has been high in the United States. It's been coming down, but there's still a sense across the country that prices have gone up.
try and come back to you and get your audio fixed, Daniel, as early as possible. We are getting a bit of a hum sound. I'll come back to you in a moment. But Farooq Dondi, we are listing out the various factors that have resulted in a landslide. You gave us an overarching picture. It almost seemed as if the Tories didn't do anything right. But do you get a sense across the world as we see pictures of Joe Biden and the Trump versus Biden battle that's upon us, what we saw in India, where the Prime Minister didn't get the kind of overwhelming majority he was expecting, that whoever is in power at the moment is on notice because people are getting impatient on issues like inflation, on issues like unemployment. These are the two global problems that the world is facing. Farooq, can you hear me?
Sorry, you're asking me, Mr. Biden is hanging on by his, shoestring, I suppose, because the blunders that he made when speaking, he really doesn't seem quite fit for office. But the Democrats and his supporters and Jill Biden don't want him to resign, and he's facing great pressure to try and stay exactly where he is. Not that I see that the Democrats, with the Vice President, Kamala Harris, Kamala is not terribly popular. She hasn't been heard of since she became Vice President, and she will definitely replace Biden if he resigns. There are other contenders in the field, but the other contenders have to overcome Kamala's natural...
I'm just stopping you for a moment, Farooq, because Daniel Block joins us again. Let's get that American perspective from him. Daniel, we've been talking about the United Kingdom. What are the parallels you see with the US and what's different?
The biggest parallels are inflation and this general sense that's going around the world that incumbents are unpopular. Those are the two biggest parallels. People feel like prices have gone up, that they can afford less than they could even a few years ago, and that's made the incumbent government quite unpopular. But there are many differences. So one thing that's dragging down the approval of the Democratic Party, and really in particular Joe Biden, is Joe Biden himself. He's clearly quite old. The debate did him no favors because it exposed, I think, some of his limits. Interestingly, one thing we see is that the Democratic Party as a whole appears to be running ahead of Joe Biden. So if you look at competitive Senate races, the Democratic nominees there are doing better than Joe Biden is himself. So he, in some ways, may be dragging down the ticket. And obviously, the most obvious difference being, as you mentioned before, the economy in the United States is stronger than it is in the United Kingdom. And yet that may not be enough to overcome issues of inflation and just general unpopularity of incumbent governments.
Can I come though, Navteej Sarna, and maybe Farooq, you can also step into this, the belief that there is this cultural factor as well at play, that Trump is talking about America first. You've had the likes of the Reform Party in Britain talking about putting Britain's interests first above all else. And there is the sense that while the economy is one issue, there's also the issue of how do we define nationalism and our best interests. Do you believe that's a factor, Navteej Sarna, when you look at what's happened in Britain, the Reform Party showing signs of being on the rise?
Yes, Rajdeep, I'm glad you've touched this point, because I was hesitating to agree with your generalization that it is only the incumbent government factor that is a problem. There are several other issues. For instance, in the United States, there is a huge Trumpian bloc, which is this almost populist right, the kind of thing that's reflected in Nigel Farage's Reform Party and relative success in this election. At the same time, there is a rise in nationalism, hyper-nationalism. There is a rise in xenophobia in parts of Europe in terms of migrants and immigration. Immigration.
We're seeing it in France, if I may say so. We're seeing it in France, the possibility that Marine Le Pen may be in the fight.
Yes, there is, for instance, there you don't see the economic issues so much. What you're seeing is an ideological divide. There is an ideological divide coming right across Europe. If you see the European Parliament elections as well, there are 6 countries in Europe out of the 27 of the EU which are ruled by far-right parties. And that is the kind of thing that Macron is trying to stem with this gamble. And, so there are ideological things. The economy, the inflation, the immigration issue, that has been more to the fore in the UK. In the United States, I think it's a far deeper divide. It's a cultural divide. It's a personality issue. And it is the system which has thrown up people like only Trump and Biden. It's a terrible choice. Today, 70% of registered voters in the US do not want Biden. 50% of the registered voters don't want Trump. But that's what they're saddled with. So, there are several factors. It would be difficult to generalize simply on the basis of incumbency.
Point taken. Farooq Dhondi, do you believe there's a cultural divide in Britain as well when you see the rise of the Reform Party, Nigel Farage and others? Are they a sign of the more worrying sign of the times? The battle continues in a sense between liberals and conservatives?
See, economic hardship is one thing, but all across Europe and America, immigration has become a huge issue. And I'm sure that in France, for instance, apart from the blunders that Macron has made in trying to raise the pensioners' age and so on, apart from economic hardship, which certainly does shape politics, this thing about immigration is playing into Donald Trump's hands, it's playing into Le Pen's hands, and so on with Hungary and very many of the states of the European Union are opposed to immigration, and that is giving a rise to the right wing. People say that the Sunak dismissal and Keir Starmer's election is a move to the left, but it's not necessarily so, because Keir Starmer is as friendly towards the same factors, the idea of growth, the idea of supporting business, whatever the business is, and so on. So Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer are not really stalwart left-wingers, even though the left wing of the Labour Party will push for certain reforms, which one looks forward to in Britain. And possibly they trust Keir Starmer more on immigration, because Rishi Sunak's policies on immigration, especially the Rwanda one, has absolutely failed. They haven't sent one person to Rwanda, and they've spent millions of pounds to Rwanda and in their propaganda about it.
In that sense, Sandeep Shastri, while I'm trying to give a world picture of looking at this big election here, because there are many more elections as well to take place in different parts of the world, is there a trend that we can at all pick? Or should we look at each election very distinctively to the other? I mentioned incumbency at the start, incumbent governments under notice, but there are other issues of nationalism, cultural divides, there are also immigration, that also are playing an important role in widening fault lines within societies. Even in India, we've had this debate between the nature of politics. Rahul Gandhi is pushing much more left of center politics, Mr. Modi pushing much harder right-wing politics. Is that still a factor you believe that's playing out there?
Rajdeep, I think there is a range of similarities which you will see in terms of electoral verdicts, though of course I must hasten to add that I am not trying to make a generalization. There are specificities with regard to every election. But if you look at the general trend, vote against the performance deficit of the regime in power is something that we are seeing around the world. And that performance deficit is in terms of the economy. The performance deficit is in terms of the service delivery which is expected of the government. That performance deficit is in terms of the way different scandals have emerged in societies. And if you look across the world, and especially if you look at Europe, the whole debate on the role of the far right, the whole debate on immigration, be it Poland, be it Denmark, be it Slovakia, be it Germany, be it France, and be it the recent EU elections. You see this common thread across elections where you see this expression of public dissatisfaction with the performance of government, be it economy, be it immigration, be it probity with regard to the performance and the work done by leaders, or the question of service delivery. I think there is this common thread of connectivity that is there. However, I would add, there are specificities in each of these countries which add on to the challenges of those in power.
In fact, those specificities, Daniel Block, in the United States is significant because, as we've been saying, this is an economy which is doing very well. And yet there is a sense, perhaps, is it the age factor, or is it simply, again, some level of a cultural divide that the Trumpians have tapped into? And so despite the fact that he's been indicted at different times, they're still standing by him. Is that is United States in a way sui generis, very distinct to what we are seeing in the rest of the world?
I mean, I think as people were saying, there are similarities and there are differences. And immigration, as people brought up, it's an enormous issue in the United States, and it's one that plays into Trump's hand. Polls routinely show that voters trust Donald Trump and the Republicans more on immigration than they trust the Democrats. In addition, there are cultural issues here that are different from immigration. There's abortion, which in theory should play into the Democrats' hands and does help them in particular cases. There's also issues around the rights of the LGBTQ community. So there's a kind of a whole stew of factors that are at play in the United States, which really cut in different directions. And yet I keep coming back to this fact that the incumbent government is just unpopular. And it was unpopular in 2020. We now have more than kind of 6 years where the incumbent government has done poorly, to the point where we may actually go from the current incumbent government back to another one. It's really hard to put your finger on any one particular force that's at work in the United States in terms of why the current government is unpopular. But it is. And I do think inflation, immigration, and different cultural issues really are at the core. But we may see if Biden steps down, whether it has a lot to do with the person of Biden himself and his age.
Which leads me to a final point, Navteej Sarna. A couple of years ago, the world thought this was the age of the strong man. You need these strong leaders who come in and say, I'm going to set the system right. Almost coming in from the outside, the so-called outsider netas. Narendra Modi was also seen to be a prototype of that kind of a neta. Is that all slowly shifting? People are saying, look, we want someone who will handle all our basic issues. Show us the direction, particularly to solving our economic hardships. Seems to be a running theme across the world, if anything.
You know, I think you're right. I mean, there is a strongman syndrome which is running across the world. Ultimately, it depends upon what the strongman is delivering and what the government is delivering. What people are looking for, essentially, for instance, is in the United Kingdom today, and I'm just drawing from that because that's happened today, is stability, is predictability. And it depends how the government is delivering that. People are looking at that daily stuff happening. Of course, there are fundamental issues. The United States, if I can go back to that for a moment, is already locked into two blocks. I mean, there are the issues that have been mentioned, whether it's inflation, abortion, immigration, etc. They have all been baked in, as the Americans say. The issue is only a few swing states. And there it matters as to how many you can pull in there onto one side or the other. And that's the American system of the way that works. So I think ultimately there are ideological battles going on. There are personality issues, and there are issues of governance. And the issues of public accountability in terms of scandals, etc. So I'm afraid that you would have to see each election in its own specificity, given a approach. We are living in an age where, you know, countries are driving away from a sort of overall cooperative situation into a more competitive situation.
Therefore, very quickly, Sandeep Shastri, what is the one thing or two things that you think Narendra Modi has done right, that he's been able to, in a way, offset 10 years of anti-incumbency? Yes, his party came down by 63 seats, but he's in government. Is that more due to the lack of trust in the opposition, or the fact that he enjoys far greater popularity than even his MPs and his party even now?
Rajdeep, today's election or the election we had a month ago proves one important point. Electoral contests are essentially perception battles. It is about the voters' perception on how a leader performs. It is about the voters' perception of what a government delivers. If the Indian Constitution became a critical factor in certain states, if the fear of amending the Constitution if somebody had 400 plus became a factor in certain states, if the strength of the leadership and the charisma of leadership became a critical factor in certain states, it is all about perception. And I would also believe that the UK verdict today is about a perception battle. The perception about the Conservatives not being able to deliver, a perception about the need for change. And I think in that sense, the verdict in India a month ago and the verdict here now has a lot of similarities in terms of how voters went out and exercised their franchise.
Very, very interesting conversation with four fine minds. I appreciate Farooq Dhondi, Navtej Sarna, Sandeep Shastri, Daniel Block for joining me. As we've said, not easy to draw parallels when you have so many elections taking place across the world. Each election must be located in its own specificity, but there are some trends that are slowly but surely emerging in this big election year across the world. Thanks so much to all my guests for joining me on the show tonight.
Thank you.
If you recall, at the start of this week, we had triggered off a debate on the 3 new criminal laws that have come into effect from the 1st of July. These new laws have replaced the colonial era legislation like the Indian Penal Code, the Criminal Procedure Code, and the Evidences Act. The Bharatiya Nyay Sanhita is now being looked at by lawyers very closely. At the start of the week, we had P. Chidambaram, lawyer, politician from the Congress party. Today, we spoke earlier to former Rajya Sabha MP, senior advocate from the BJP side, Mahesh Jetpalani, to understand what he thought, how he saw the key changes in these new criminal laws. Take a look. I want you to first address the criticism that's coming in of the new laws. Many believe they give far too much power to police and therefore they need a review. I'll come to specifics later, but the wider debate, do you believe these new laws are draconian because of the powers they give the police?
Yeah, Rajdeep, from what I've heard is that there's a criticism that this gives excessive power to the police, yes, and a little unfair to accused persons. No, that's not really true, Rajdeep. I tell you what the thrust of the changes are. I take it we're now talking about the procedural aspects of the new laws, which is encompassed in the BNSS, the Bharatiya Nyay Suraksha Sanhita.
Yes.
Because that contains most of the provisions pertaining to procedure. Now, look, frankly speaking, there is no real change. There's just probably one provision which I myself have some, doubts about, right? And that also, it just requires a change of a word. But by and large...
Which provision is that? Which is that provision that you are troubled with?
Well, there's a provision which, deals with custody, custody. The maximum period was police custody of 15 days, right?
That's right.
That's the maximum period you could have for 15 days. But under the old law, laid down in the judgment called Anupam Kulkarni, right, which held the field for many years, you had to arrest somebody for this maximum period of 15 days within the first 15 period of his arrest, right? Now, the new law, actually, the trend started by Senthil's judgment, which is a very recent judgment, which said there is no reason why this 15-day period should all be within the first 15 days of his arrest. Right? They said can be divided in 2 parts, and they said it can be any time during the period for which his custody is permissible, which is 60 days in the case of some offences and 90 days in the period. So they said you can split it up, right? Now, splitting up the rationale for splitting up was that sometimes you might find evidence later on, not in the first 15 days, right? So you need to take somebody into custody again if custodial interrogation is required. So you can break it up. Now, the present section which deals with this, right, it says it can be done in parts, right? Now, when you say it can be done in parts, it means you could actually arrest somebody for about 15 times if you want to take him into remand for 1 day at a time, right? So you could you could arrest him for a day, release him, and then arrest him again 15 times, technically speaking. Or if you want to do 2 days, you could do it for about 7-8 times. So the in parts should be restricted to 2 parts. That word 2 should be included in that section. I think that's an oversight. If you want to cover that situation where evidence comes later, right? Then certainly you should make it only 2 parts and not make the 15 days total period of police custody over about 5 or 6 times he can be arrested. Mm-hmm. That's the only flaw that I can see. The rest of the Sanhita, the Suraksha Sanhita, is basically geared towards expediting the entire procedure of the criminal justice system, from police investigation to filing of a charge sheet to discharge applications to trials, mm-hmm. and to even to judgments. Even judges have to deliver their judgment within 30 days and not keep it pending forever, or a maximum of 45 in exceptional cases. So that's the main thrust of the Sanhita. The other thing is the extensive use of electronic evidence in every area. So FIRs can be filed electronically. You don't have to go to a police station and file you can do it even on a WhatsApp. Officer in charge of police station, his number is there. You can file your FIR electronically, and it comes in every stage. You can have every witness now. One of the reasons for trials, it was an endemic reason for delay, and that was witnesses did not show up on the due date. Right? There were so many dates when the matters are just adjourned because witnesses were not present. Now you can get witnesses deposing on video conference. So there's a forensic laboratory to be established by every state government, right? You are basically therefore enhancing forensic investigation. You're using audio, video medium for all aspects of trial, right? And not only that, for instance, now the entire search and seizure process, the entire search has to be compulsorily audio, video recorded. So there can be no planting of narcotics anymore.
But Mr. Jethmalani, you're giving us what you see as the positives in the procedure. You have certain concerns, as many people have, over police custody rules. But let me turn to an area which is again concerning, which is that at a time when the Supreme Court had weighed strongly against sedition, here is the Bharatiya Nyay Sanhita bringing it through the back door under section 152 and 150. They are bringing back sedition through the back door, when it is said that you can criminalize an act which is seen against the sovereignty of the country. It keeps a very wide definition and effectively brings back sedition.
But, Rajdeep, you see, the difference between the old law and the new law, the new 152, is that the old law, right, it was basically meant to protect our colonial masters, right? Because it's talked about any act which excited disaffection towards the government of the day. So it was government specific. It was not politically neutral. In the case of the colonial masters, this was an 1860 law, the IPC. So in that case, right, it specifically was meant to protect the British rulers from disaffection by their subjects, right? Causing disaffection against British rule, in other words. The change is now that it's not the government of the day. So, the government of the day can't take umbrage about any criticism on its own part. And that's why the sedition law was stayed, because not just all governments were guilty about it. There have been sedition in every state, sedition cases in every state, and the Supreme Court finally stayed it. Now the shift is that you can't have words and actions which tend to undermine the integrity and sovereignty of India. You can't promote subversive activities, and you can't promote secessionism. which I think is unacceptable. These are well-defined words, right?
So another new law, Mr. Jethmalani, which people are concerned about, which says individuals who engage in sexual relations by deceit, such as false promises of employment or marriage without intention to fulfill them, could face imprisonment of up to 10 years accompanied by fines. Many fear this will criminalize even consensual relationships. Are you not worried, again, that laws giving more powers to the police are not good for the country?
Rajdeep, you're talking about now section. We've gone from 152 to 69
yes.
of the Sanhita. I take it that's the section you're referring to.
That is right.
Let me tell you, there's a history to this section, right? This is basically the philanderer's nightmare section, which I call it, right? But the fact of the matter is that under the old law, the IPC, the Supreme Court since 2003, right up to 2023, Justice Oak's judgment in the Supreme Court, right, has dealt with these cases, and they've said that if you entice a woman into sexual intercourse on a promise to marry her, it amounts to vitiation of her consent. That means her consent is not truly given. Her consent is given because you have made a false promise to her. So they brought it within the rape law, old section 375, right? And, it did not fit in. It really did not fit in, but they twisted the whole concept of rape to discourage this kind of behavior, that you promise a woman to marry her and then, have sexual intercourse with her. So it was already there. Now it's been taken out of rape. And apart from being taken out of the old 375 rape, it's not in the new section 63 of rape. It's a distinct offense, right, under 69. And what has happened is, it's only when the victim of the fraud, the deceit, can prove that he never intended, that the initial promise was at inception, never meant to be kept, right? For instance, perhaps if he was a married man and concealed the fact from you, right, then the section would come into operation. Or for some other reason, deceit was practiced on you. But if it's a case where you've had sexual intercourse, right, and you've had a slightly prolonged relationship, this will not apply, and you change your mind. Suppose you did enter into a sexual relationship with the promise to marry, with the intention to marry, right? But subsequently, there's a change of mind, either because of parental reasons or for the simple reason that you fall in love with anybody else. Now, that now is not punishable under the new 69.
But
a change of mind, a bona fide change of mind is not punishable under 67.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mahesh Jethmalani, for joining me. Thank you.
Rajdeep. Thank you.
Let's turn to tonight's Get Real India story, and it comes from Assam, which is hit once again by floods as the monsoon sweeps through the northeast. The death toll has crossed 50. The Kaziranga National Park is among the worst affected areas. Tonight's ground report comes from Assam.
The Brahmaputra is in spate. Over 16 lakh people impacted. 29 districts of Assam are badly affected. The Kaziranga National Park is also ravaged.
Behind me, you can see the situation in Golaghat district in Assam, where miles and hectares of land are submerged into deep water. Houses are almost submerged into deep water. People have fled from their residences because the condition of these houses are very critical.
Around 27 animals have died, according to forest officials. Till now, 68 animals have been rescued by Forest Department in Kaziranga.
अभी पिछले 4 दिन में जो काजीरंगा टाइगर रिजर्व में फ्लड हुआ है, उसके रिस्पांस के लिए ये रिहेबिलिटेशन सेंटर प्लस 2 और सैटेलाइट फैसिलिटी हमने क्रिएट किया है. तीनों यूनिट मिला के अभी तक 68 एनिमल्स वी हैव मैनेज्ड टू रेस्क्यू एंड ट्रीट.
More than 100 anti-poaching camps are submerged. The Forest Department has restricted heavy vehicles on NH 37, which passes through Kaziranga. Women forest guards named Van Durgas are deployed on the national highway.
हमारी जो प्लानिंग थी, स्ट्रैटेजी थी, वो हमारी शुरू हो गई थी। मुझे लग रहा है 1 तारीख से ही हम कह सकते हैं, क्योंकि जब हमें सरकार ने जब परमिशन दे दी कि ट्रैफिक डाइवर्जन करेंगे, तो उससे क्या हुआ कि हमारा जो एक सॉर्ट ऑफ जो एक प्लान हुआ कि हम किसी भी कारण से अननेचुरल कॉजेज से हम जानवर को मरने नहीं देंगे, उसका हमने एक स्ट्रैटेजी कर लिया।
Several relief shelters for people displaced by floods in Kaziranga have been opened. At this particular relief center, 150 families have taken shelter.
More than 16 lakh people are affected so far by this second wave of Assam flood. Almost 46 people have already been died in the second phase of this flood. And people are hoping that rains will stop and the waters which have come, which have submerged their houses, will recede soon. With camera person Orgho, this is Anupam Mishra for India Today.
Let's leave you though with our final image and story tonight. Prime Minister Narendra Modi yesterday interacted with the T20 World Cup winning team. The video is now out. It's rather an interesting video where the Prime Minister in a very informal conversation with all the players. So I leave you with that. Prime Minister Modi with our World Cup winning T20 players. Thanks for watching. Stay well, stay safe. Good night. Shubhratri. Jai Hind. Namaskar.
रोहित, मैं इस पल के पीछे आपका मन को जानना चाहता हूँ। जमीन कोई भी हो, मिट्टी कहीं भी की हो, लेकिन क्रिकेट का जिंदगी ही पिच पे होती है और आपने क्रिकेट की जो जिंदगी है उसको चुमा कि ये कोई हिंदुस्तानी ही कर सकता है।
जहां पर हमें वो विक्ट्री मिली, उसका मुझे बस एक पल जो था वो हमेशा याद रखना था और वो चखना था बस, क्योंकि उस पिच पर हम खेल के उस पिच पर जीते, क्योंकि हमने सब लोगों ने उस चीज का इतना वेट किया, इतना मेहनत किया। बहुत बार हमारे पास, बिल्कुल पास में आया था वर्ल्ड कप, बट हम आगे नहीं जा सके। लेकिन इस बार सब लोगों की वजह से हम उस चीज को हासिल कर सके। तो वो पिच मेरे लिए बहुत, मतलब ये था कि उस पिच पे हमने वो जो भी हमने किया उस पिच पे किया, तो इसलिए वो बस उस मोमेंट पे वो हो गया मेरे से।
विराट, बताइए, इस बार की लड़ाई तो आप उतार चढ़ाव वाली रही आपकी।
पहले तो बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आपका कि आपने हम सबको यहाँ बुलाया, और ये दिन मेरे लिए बहुत हमेशा मेरे जहन में रहेगा, क्योंकि ये पूरे टूर्नामेंट में मैं वो कंट्रीब्यूशन नहीं कर पाया जो मैं करना चाहता था। और एक समय पे मैंने राहुल भाई को भी बोला कि मैंने अपने आप को और टीम को, दोनों को न्याय नहीं दिया अभी तक। तो इन्होंने मुझे बोला कि जब सिचुएशन आएगी तो मुझे भरोसा है कि तुम परफॉर्म करोगे।